haven't even done anything yet. Thank you very much. I want to read you a story that comes out of the Practicing the Presence by Joel Goldsmith. There's an old story about a great spiritual teacher who knocked at the gates of heaven for admission into paradise. After some time, God came to the door and inquired, "Who's there? Who knocks?" To this query came the confident response, "It is I." "Sorry, very, very sorry. There's no room in heaven. Go away. You'll have to come back some other time." The good man, surprised at the rebuff, went away puzzled. After several years spent in meditation and pondering over the strange reception, he returned and knocked again at the gate. And he was met with the same question and gave the similar response. And once again, he was told that there was no room in heaven. It was completely filled at that time. In the years that passed, the teacher went deeper and deeper within himself, meditating and pondering. And after a long period of time had elapsed, he knocked at the gates of heaven for a third time. And again, God said, "Who's there?" This time he answered, "Thou art." And the gates opened as wide as God said, "Come in." There was never room for me and thee. There is not God and you or I. There is only God expressed, manifest as an individual. There's only one life, the Father's. We are outside of heaven with no hope of ever gaining entrance to it as long as we believe that we have a selfhood apart from God, a being separate and independent of God. And all through the ages, duality has separated us from our good, but it is a sense of duality, not duality, because there is no duality. The secret of life is oneness, and oneness is not something that we bring about. Oneness is a state of being. Well, I still haven't done anything. Shoot. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this state of oneness and the state of the world at the same time. And so I know that, not everybody likes for me to talk about politics because they come here to be escaped from politics. But on this day before the election, I just thought I'd just take advantage of the fact that we need to act and live and speak as though we believed it. And part of the problem with the political atmosphere that we're in is we're invited constantly to not see ourselves as one with everyone, but to be tribal and to have our side win and in a zero-sum game, their side lose. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the moral stances that we take, not assuming that we all take the same one, but assuming it would be good if we understood each other. So let me talk to you about morality, which we rarely ever do. I once was asked by somebody, Mark Siljander, he said, "You guys must talk about morality." I said, "No, we never do. We assume that as a baseline. We just assume that you know what's right and wrong, more or less. And I'm not going to tell you. So I hardly ever speak about morality, but I want to talk about the conditions that we develop our moral code in. So it is assumed, essentially, by some social scientists at this point, that we have innate within us 5 areas of morality that are kind of baked in, that we're born with, and then they are adjusted as we grow up, and so we have more or less of each one as we mature. So the first one I'd like to say is this idea of no harm. So if you shouldn't harm other people. That's kind of like the first one. And everybody kind of buys that one hook, line, and sinker, most of the time, anyway. And the second one is fairness. And you see even little children understand fairness. It's even been said that dogs understand fairness. So if you've ever had 2 dogs and you give one dog a treat and you don't give the other dog a treat, or maybe you've seen the movie where they give one monkey a reward of a grape and the other one a reward of a cucumber. He goes, "Cucumber? You're kidding me." And he throws a cucumber at the researcher. We get fairness. We get that. It's baked into us. There are three more. There's in-group and loyalty, that you belong to a group and you should be loyal to that group. That's another form of morality that we have in it, and you can see that on the playground, but you can also see it in nations and football teams, right? Do it for the team. You should give yourself. You should sacrifice your body for the team, right? It's very common. It's part of the moral code of playing football. It's not about you. The other one is authority and respect, and that is that some people should have authority over other people, and every parent at some point says, because I say so, right? They pull the authority respect trump card, and that's the one they play. Of course, it makes sense. A child should not be telling the parent a lot of things. And then there's purity and sanctity. And purity and sanctity basically has components. As you know right now, many of us are quite righteous about what we eat. Have you noticed? Have you tried to throw a dinner party lately? And it's complicated. 6 people, you got to ask at least 5 of them, you got any special food preferences? Because you're the 6th one and you know yours. And so it's a bit of a purity thing, is how that's how it's showing up in some ways, but also it's kind of like moral purity or ideology purity. And one of the things that's disturbing is that this purity, this ideological purity, says we don't compromise with anybody. We know what's right, our way or the highway, and that works, and then really it doesn't, you know. So I want to talk about liberals versus conservatives. So one of the things that we're all kind of born with all 5, but in the liberals, the first 2 are really ascendant, the ones about don't harm and fairness, and that's why they're very much about inclusivity and bringing in and taking care of those who have been ostracized by society, perhaps more about letting immigrants in and that sort of thing. That's kind of those 2 are ascendant in the liberal community. And they rank fairly high in the conservative community. But the liberal community stops right there, and the conservative community continues on with the other 3. So there's a sense of you should respect authority, and that there's a hierarchical aspect of it, and that there are norms that we must agree to, and therefore there needs to be order. So you can imagine that to the conservative mind, this lack of order, this letting everybody in, this doing just anything you want, everything is acceptable, is not acceptable. Because the concentration in their moral view is that things need to be predictable and orderly and pure. And if you don't have that, you have no social contract. And if you have no social contract, you cannot organize. And without organization, you move into chaos. And with chaos, nothing works. And so it's an enormously important thing that there is that orderliness that comes from those 3 qualities. And so really, when you think about it, and I happen to know that most of you fall on this first category of liberal, and not everyone, but there's a righteousness on the left about these people over here on the other side, and yet it turns out they have more moral practice and practices than the liberals do. So it's something to ponder that, hey, judge your neighbor. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe the other side has a point of view. Because in support of the liberal idea, The authoritarian states have been fostered by that need for order and structure, that classic lines. In Nazi Germany, the trains ran on time, right? So we need to be clear that both sides have a point of view valid and worthy of the respect of the other. Now, that's not all, but that should give you a little bit of pause to think that maybe we don't know what we're talking about. I was listening to this social scientist named John Haidt, unfortunate name, H-A-I-D-T, and he was saying, essentially that he started out as a liberal, a professor at the University of Virginia, and he started to do research on this idea of the social contract, and he read a book on conservatism written by a conservative probably in the 1800s, and he said, man, these are some fantastic ideas. And he started to change his point of view about what was really helpful in society and what was not. And if you can do that, if you can begin to see the world from the other person's point of view, then you can see that there's a lot more ground for agreement. Now, I'd like to point out that most of the conversation about capitalism versus communism has kind of faded. It's not front and center for us now. But you may recall that as recent as Ronald Reagan, we thought that if we had enough nuclear weapons to end life on this planet, that would be a smart way of dealing with two ways of making a living. So they had one way of making a living, and we had another, and we disagreed with them so thoroughly that we thought we should arm ourselves, and they thought they should arm themselves as well. And so we both armed ourselves with enough stuff to make every second that we're alive as a human race potentially the last one. That's wild, isn't it? That over a disagreement about how you make a living would go that far? Now, social scientists say that in this country we have never been as polarized as we are today. You have to go back to 1860 to find as polarized so you know what was happening in 1860. You certainly know what was happening in 61 to 65. This inability to resolve social issues by coming together did not seem possible at that time, and things went down. I propose we don't go back there. We don't nuclearize our politics or overemphasize our tribalism. Tribalism is fun. You may not think so, but if you've ever put a flag on your car on the day of a football game, you have practiced tribalism. Or gone and yelled for your team to win, you've done that. And we have enjoyed being a tribe. We enjoy being in a school tribe or being in a church tribe. But if we don't break out of the tribe, we can lend ourselves to some bad outcomes. So my hope is that what we will change is to begin to look at the world as though we're all in the same tribe. Now that's something that some movies have proposed, that essentially that if we had an external enemy, we would all be of one tribe, right? We would all see the problems as they are. Well, we do have an external enemy, it's more of an internal enemy. We could self-destruct because we can't figure this out. And as a country, we could weaken ourselves. And if you've ever played those board games about, I forgot what it's called, where you get to choose which country you are. I always chose the United States because you can't lose if you're the United States. No one can invade you. You cannot be defeated by anybody. It's just because you're a continental nation with tons of resources, you'll never be bothered by anybody. But you could implode. And if we don't do better about loving each other and seeing each other as morally equivalent or better, we're not going to do so well. And it will happen at some time, even if I don't say another word about it. We probably will overcome this. But let me just say, it's the jack-in-the-box effect, in my opinion. And I don't like the jack-in-the-box effect, although I've lived by it quite a bit, unfortunately. You know the jack-in-the-box. You have a jack-in-the-box, you push this thing down in there. It's a spring-loaded face that pops up when you crank the thing long enough, and it will pop up, and kids laugh and think it's exciting. And maybe that's the way God is. They go, oh, isn't this funny? Watch them. They're going to just hate life for a while. Crank the box. Bing! Oh, I'm happy again, right? Maybe that's the big plan. Maybe it's the cosmic plan. I'm not sure. But it happens. You know, I think this is why AA and a lot of the anonymouses work so well, is that people go down so far, they start on a spiritual path, and then they crank it for a while, and poof, they pop up, and they're at a place that was higher before they went down into addiction. It's an amazing thing. And it happens with a lot of us. It happens we have a course correction. It's usually painful. And I would like to avoid the pain. Any more pain. I think I've had enough. You had enough? And the way to do that is to see the other as yourself. To see all as yourself. And to recognize, as Holly said, you know, it's like judge your neighbor and then see that judgment is really pointing as much as you, or more so, than your neighbor. And that you don't really know if they should be like that. You don't really know. We think we know, but we don't, because let me just give you an example of that. There's a social scientist who did a mega study of the outcomes of what would happen, of the studies that have done, of what would happen if you raised the minimum wage. So, you know, there's people on the right who say if you raise the minimum wage, what you'll have is a reduction in general workforce, there'll be fewer people, and therefore the economy actually will go down by raising, there'll be less money. And the people on the other side say if you raise the minimum wage, you'll have more money in the circulation, and as that happens, it'll give more jobs, and those more jobs will produce better outcomes. And then they tried to figure out how the same statistics could be worked out to have two opposite outcomes, and they found it all depended on the prejudice, the prejudice of the researcher would take the same information, and if they were on the right, they would end up on this side, and if they were on the left, they would end up with that. There was no way to even know the truth, because you couldn't even take statistics and make an honest answer out of it. The truth was out there, but not to be known. Which leads me to another thing. We probably don't know. We think we know. We have our moral ideas. But our tribe reinforces our thoughts. And the other interesting study said that if you have a predilection in one direction, and you have one thing that confirms it, you'll deny all the other facts. This is tough to beat. Because you could have a ton of facts, and the one thing would say, well, that doesn't work, and you just go with it. So there you have it. That's our mental problem, is that we can't know. We can't know the truth. We can't look around outside our own prejudices. We can't understand completely what's going on, and yet we make big judgments about the other. I think humility is the very thing we're asked to bring to this problem. Deep and profound humility. I don't know. I stand for this. I believe in this. But is it the absolute maximum truth? I don't know. I don't know. Now, this may sound like it's all about politics, but how many of you have ever been in a relationship in your family where it would have been really smart to say, yeah, I don't know. I think this, but I could be wrong. What do you think? How many relationships fall apart because somebody's so bloody right? The famous line, would you rather be happy or right? Most of us choose right. Right? Am I right? Yeah, okay. So, we want so much to be loved and to be happy. Don't you just want to be loved and happy? Isn't? And you know that jerk over there on the other side, what does he want? To be loved and happy. He has a strategy about how to do it that's different than yours, but what does he want? To be loved and happy. And he wants to be successful in all the things he does, right? And he wants to feel safe, and he wants to feel like he's making a contribution, and that he's following, he's being good enough. What is that, right? And what do you want? The same thing. You want everything that he wants. You just have a different strategy. A different strategy is not a big problem, is it? It's a strategy. Did this work? Or does it not work? And you'll never even know the answer because your predilections won't let you know. But aside from that, think about it, be humble about it, right? Maybe they got something. Maybe an honest dialogue might be better than, you jerk. Not usually very persuasive. Hey, you jerk, why are you doing that, you know? I want to come to one more thing, which I just have found fascinating. It's been liberating for me in the last day, is what's this lying about? Right? How can you actually come to any sense of understanding when there's so much lying? First of all, I'd like to say, I have railed in the past against people who make a living dividing this country. I would like them to stop. They push the jack in box down far enough, they can quit. We got to start doing the organ grinding part now. We got to start building some goodwill with each other. So I suggest, since they won't quit unless you quit them, stop listening to them on either side. All right, so we get that out of the way. That's great. And now that you've clapped, I can't remember where I was going with this whole thing. But anyway, the lying, yes. So I've been reading a book. It's called Listen to the Marriage. I've been reading another book called The Way of the Superior Man, which sounds fairly arrogant, but it's really not exactly that. And I was reading this about this lying. And essentially lying in this context has been, so many people who support people who are lying in the way they're lying, they go, well, I know they're lying. Doesn't really matter. And then it dawned on me, all of it is about emotional conversation. It's all talking emotions. They're just talking emotions, they're not talking facts. So how many times have you been in a relationship with someone and they're talking emotion and you go, well, that's not the way it really was or is, right? And then you can't get through to them because they believe, well, it's not because they believe it is the truth, they just are talking emotion, right? Are you with me? And so when you hear this, don't let it bother you. It's just talking emotions. I was reading this guy who is, I forget, Sayer or something like that, who's a billionaire, who's trying to build, Steyer, thank you. Steyer he's got a campaign, impeach the president. And someone said, that's not going to happen. I don't care if you win the election or not. That's not going to happen. He says, yeah, I know. It's just like build the wall. So don't be caught in it. Right? Don't be caught in it. The news cycle has occupied more time than your prayer cycle has. right? So dial it down and build it up, Spend more time in prayer and meditation. Spend more time not listening to this stuff. The insidiousness of it injected into our minds is worse than it's ever been, and that's why we are uncomfortable with it as it is. So stop. Spend more time in meditation and prayer. Spend less time watching the news. Never listen to anybody who yells and screams on the radio. Just be done with it. Letsmoveon.com. Do you know what I mean? Let's be brighter than those who would profit by our suffering. And our suffering comes from separateness. As the meditation we did earlier said, it's only this I that says I'm separate that causes a sensation of much of our suffering. If you can thin that I thought down, then you don't have to suffer as much. So let's not let politics be the thing that forces us into the I thought, into a separate sense of self, into tribalism, into unhappiness. Let's be smarter than that. Please vote. It'll make you feel like you belong to this country. Please vote. State your case. You have extended your tribe from half to all the country when you vote. You say, I belong and I contribute. But don't take a stand that says, I win, you lose, or you win, I lose. We're all in this together. Let us pray. So the breath. There was a Indian from India, that is, a man who came and spoke here on Friday night. And he said, the breath comes in and it goes so, and out it goes hum, or is it hum so? I'm not sure which. And that phrase, when it's repeated over and over, is saying over and over, I am that. In Sanskrit, I am that, I am that. I am the one presence. I am that one presence, one power. It also might be turned sideways instead of vertically and looked at your neighbor and go, hum sa, I am that as well. So up or sideways, every breath reminds you, I am that. We're not really that different, and we're certainly not separate. I am that. We breathe in thousands of times a day. Let every breath remind you, I am that. Let us be humble. I am that is not proud, is not arrogant, does not seek to harm or to win over, but to win with and to support. As the first story told us, we can't get into heaven as an I, as a separate. We get into heaven by being that, the one presence, the one power. May our verbal discourse reflect it. May our thoughts and actions reflect it. May peace begin with us. And when we can't, be as clear-headed as we wanted to be. Let us just love. And let love guide us. And so it is. Amen. I want to say I'm doing a prayer class, and if you missed the first one, you're still invited. I had the ball last time. It's Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and it was a pretty small class, and so it was the synergy of everyone speaking about their experience and then working toward this understanding of oneness and how you would pray, how you would surrender to the divine, how all that would happen because of a deeper understanding of the nature of reality. I would invite you all to be there, because if next week is anything like this last week, you gotta be there. I'm sorry. Well, anyway, so that's really good. There's something else that's happening this afternoon.